Welcome to the Communication Queens podcast for the visionary leaders, speakers, service providers, and podcasters who are looking to stand out sharing their story. I'm your host, Kimberly Spencer, former screenwriter turned master communications coach. On this podcast, I'll be coaching you on how to share your own transformation story so that you increase your visibility, influence, and income on podcast interviews. Let's get your voice heard. Hello, and welcome to the Communication Queens podcast. I am your host, Kimberly Spencer. It is my honor to be here with you to share and serve you with the power of storytelling and what I found to be an incredible lead generation strategy, not just for me, but also now for our clients as well, which is podcast guesting and the power of podcasts and what podcasts can do for your business, for your visibility, and for your voice, for your own embodiment of your own story. One of the things that I learned early on when I was going to say a kid, but I wasn't exactly a kid. I was 19 years old, and I started my first job because I've been an entrepreneur since I was 19. I started my first job as an entrepreneur where I was freelancing at a Pilates studio. And I realized through teaching Pilates at multiple different studios and listening to so many different stories. I mean, I was at one point teaching 10 hours a day for 5 days a week and 6 hours on a Saturday. And I still remember that schedule as being one of my favorite and most challenging times in my life because it was really like a kickoff point to learning how your environment of the people you listen to, of the people you surround yourself with, whether in person, like I was teaching Pilates, or in podcasts, and how sharing your story, sharing your experiences, sharing what you're going through actually can create healing. And by listening to others and by listening to other people's experiences, listening to their stories, learning from them, you can transform and heal in the most miraculous of ways. It wasn't until I started teaching Pilates that I fast-tracked the time that I had spent in recovery from my eating disorder. After I changed my environment from living in a home with an addict who was manic and on either opioids or alcohol or pot or all the things, to living on my own, surrounding myself with different stories and different ways of survival. And that's the power of stories. And that's why here at Communication Queens, we have a few slogans. One is that your story has the power to save a life. The other slogan that we have here at Communication Queens is that brand awareness is BS without sales. So we're all about the impact of leveraging your stories to save lives, to change, to create transformation in this world. And we also are being smart business owners about leveraging our time. I know for me, I am a mother of 2 small children. I have a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old, both boys, both very active boys. And I don't have a lot of time to waste on lead generation strategies that don't work. And that was why when I was living abroad in Australia and I had no way of using, this was during COVID, so I had no way of using what was my primary source of lead generation, which was live events. I had no way of doing that in Australia because I couldn't do those paid because of my visa. I couldn't do those because of COVID, period. And so there I was looking for a way to attract new customers into my then 6-year-old coaching business. And that was when I remembered a podcast interview from 2019 that had resulted in a $10,000 sale for my business. When I remembered that conversation and how that had rippled into a sale, I thought, why not double down on guest podcasting? And so my team and I played with it for a while, and eventually we trial and errored it over the course of 9 months to the point where we generated over $70,000 in new business revenue from just guest podcasting alone. Now it's over $250,000. So that is the power of going out on guest podcasts. And not just for me, because now that we've had the agency for the past year and we've beta tested it, proven our concept, proven it works, our clients have now gotten featured in major magazines. They've got keynoted at the LA Convention Center. They've gone on to speak at Google and Microsoft. And it's all from the compound interest that comes with podcasting. I also say that I would have never been able to do my TED Talk because I did a TEDx talk in Australia, and I only had 3 weeks notice. Had I not been on 100 podcasts up until that point where I had learned how to refine and share and communicate and practice my oratory skill set, I would not have had the preparedness to be ready to be able to deliver a talk that created the level of impact that it did. So guest podcasting is an incredibly powerful medium. And that is what we're going to dive into in the Communication Queens podcast, not only in just storytelling strategies and how to better tell your stories. And having been a master NLP, if you're not familiar with what NLP means, it's not natural language processing like computer language. It is neurolinguistic programming. That is basically how your brain perceives and encapsulates and creates mental images in your mind, and how to leverage that to know how you're influencing and persuading others in the external world around you. And NLP has been studied and learned by many, many major famous orators that you know, including some major politicians, including US presidents. So we will be sharing those strategies and those tips and tricks so that you understand the power of your language. Your word is your wand. It literally creates your reality. I could not have the reality that I have today, which is mind-blowing, considering the trauma, the challenges, the disorders, the addictions that I lived with or that lived with me, and those experiences and how they shaped me and how I learned how to reshape my mind, my language, my experience of that to then serve on a much greater level. I now get to live in my dream home with my husband and my 2 beautiful children, all of which wouldn't have happened if I hadn't changed my mindset and hadn't changed the way that I was speaking to myself and also speaking my story out into the world. Because as you know, the more you speak your story, the deeper you groove into those neural pathways. And if your stories are mired in blame and shame and guilt, then you're deepening those neural pathways of blame and shame and guilt and comparison and jealousy and all of that. But if you can leverage the power of your own story to give grace, understanding, and acceptance to those dark periods of experiences that you went through, and also grow from them, and also see them as such a powerful catalyst, and also see them as how they happened for you. And thus, because you're speaking about them, because you're sharing them, because you're sharing the lessons that you learn from them, you are supporting others in their own growth, transcendence, and transformation, because you are putting your story out into the world filled with positive light. And I'm not talking toxic positivity. I'm not saying make light of the situation. I'm saying honor the darkness and the stories that you went through. Honor those experiences and having reverence for them and understanding how to share them in a way that you don't deepen the grooves of the neural pathways of the negativity of those experiences, but you're able to see the power and positivity of how those experiences can transform and transmute what happened into something that will actually be of service to the world to help us all evolve in our consciousness. And because brand awareness is BS without sales, we will, of course, be talking about sales strategies with podcasts, how to leverage them, how to not leverage them, how to be very discerning about the experience and your intentions of going onto a podcast. Because I will promise you, if you are just planning on going on podcasts and just selling the heck out of your stuff or manipulating the podcaster after hearing some of their story to think that they need your services, you are sorely mistaken. The power of podcasting comes from when we are able to connect heart to heart, to serve each other by listening. As I like to tell my kids, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth.
and to be able to serve from that space of really being fully present with another person with no hidden agenda other than to serve and to mutually support and to contribute to one another's success. Because that is where the power of podcasting comes into play, is podcasting creates a win-win dynamic when done right. It creates a win-win relationship of you are sharing your story, you are adding value to the podcaster's audience. They in turn are doing your marketing for free. And when you start listening to more of what I'm going to share on this podcast of the monetization strategies and how you can support a podcaster in monetizing their podcast by just having you on, which is one of the things that I was able to do, which is partly what generated the income that it did from guest podcasting. And when you're able to connect and work through and brainstorm and mastermind and grow together in a relationship, instead of thinking of podcasting as I like to say like a one-night stand. Like it's like, oh, great. Thanks for the podcast. Thanks for the interview. Okay, bye. And then you never hear from them again until it's distributed. Like, hey, good to see you. Like, by the way, your podcast episode came out. That does not a relationship make. So being able to honor the relationship, honor the intimacy of the relationship, of having those deep, profound conversations and bearing your soul, sharing vulnerably and courageously. And from there, being open to where the relationship could evolve. Maybe it evolves into a business partnership. Maybe it evolves into a referral partnership. Maybe it evolves into just being business besties and masterminding. Maybe it evolves into a client-coach relationship. There are so many ways that it could evolve beyond just the podcast episode itself. And that is what I want to dive into on this podcast, so that you can leverage that 1 hour of give and take, of exchange, of mutual exchange, serving each other, serving each other's audiences, and then share that with the world and ripple forth in greater abundance. I think podcasting, and guest podcasting in particular, is one of the greatest and most abundant forms of marketing that you can find in any business. And if you leverage it right, which I'm going to show you and teach you exactly how to do on this podcast, and this is what we do for our clients as an agency, we get them booked on the right podcasts with the right audience that need their stories, and they may need their services. And that's where we create epic alignment. And when you can harness that power of reciprocity and generosity in a relationship, that can make a powerful podcasting relationship that lives on beyond the episode. I think that when most people go on to do just a podcast episode, I was on a call with a woman who proudly said, I've done 40 podcast episodes. And I said, have any of those leveraged an ROI? To which she hung her head and was like, no, I didn't know they were supposed to. And I'm like, that's where we have the work to do. And that's the work that we're going to be diving into in this podcast, is being able to leverage that relationship, make the most out of it, give with reciprocity, with generosity, show up fully. Now, here at Communication Queens, we have a framework that we work all our clients through on the power of guest podcasting. And when you do these steps, you will be magical, just purely magical. So step number 1 is what we call start now. Just start now. Put yourself out there. Start getting booked on podcasts. Start now, because I can let you know that we're coming out with this podcast. This podcast is being recorded in November of 2023. And we are already booking our clients out for Q2. And if you're not familiar with that business language, that means April to June of 2024. So podcasting is a longer term strategy. So start now. In fact, start yesterday. And if you can't start yesterday, because I don't know if you have a time machine, and if you do, that's really cool and I'd love to see it. But if you can't start yesterday, start now. Start connecting, building your relationships with podcasters, start putting yourself out there. Number 2 is set yourself up for success. Get yourself out there on the podcasting platforms. Get yourself into the podcast Facebook groups. Get yourself into our Profit from Guest Podcasting Facebook group and start connecting with podcasters. Number 3 is show up. Yeah, Woody Allen said it best. 80% of success is just showing up. Show up for the interview. Show up as your best self. Show up to put yourself out there, and you will receive. Then we have standing out. Now, how do you stand out on a podcast? I mean, especially if a podcast has 200 episodes. I was just having a conversation with a top 1% podcaster, and she has mastered her niche. And we were talking about, who she was looking for a guest. And she was like, I don't want to waste your time. I don't want to waste their time. I don't want to waste my time. This is who I'm very specifically looking for. And part of standing out is being a master of your craft. Really, truly having a level of mastery for what you do. And if you don't know if you're a master, keep practicing, keep doing, keep going for it, keep practicing, keep being the student, keep mastering what it is that you do. And sometimes you can do that on a podcast too, because you can definitely start with some podcasts that are new or podcasts that aren't in the top 5%. Like we as an agency only book our clients on the top 5% of podcasts, but you can definitely start out on some newer ones to just get your reps in. Nothing will compensate for practice and getting your reps in. You have to do it. Then we have step number 5, share your story. Now, we're going to lean into heavily into storytelling tips, tricks, strategies. You're going to hear me coach live some of our clients, some of our podcast party attendees, some other guests, some of my friends on how they're sharing their story, how they can better share their story, what are the pieces of their story that need to be leveraged more, and what are the pieces of their story that they could highlight or deepen or darken or create some gradients or add some color to. And as you listen, I encourage you to listen with the lens of how can I apply this to my story? How can I apply this to my own speaking and my oratory skill set and mastering that as a craft? Then we have step number 6, which is to serve. Serve powerfully. Give your tips and tricks and strategies. I hate it, and I'm sure you have too. When you're listening to a podcast, you're super engrossed. You're learning. You're so excited. I mean, 3 out of 4 people who tune into podcasts listen to learn something new. And when people hide things behind the veil of their product or program, it makes me want to, as my husband would say, flip a table. That just the animated sort of just I was so excited to learn from this person, and then they hid their genius behind the veil. And believe me, having been a business owner since I was 19 years old, having been in the coaching industry since 2015, I completely, wholeheartedly understand the value of having certain things that are products and certain things that you do inside of the inside of your products and programs and services, and certain things that you do outside. And a simple breakdown to determine what are the things that you want to put behind the veil of your course and your program, and what are the things that you can put out and share on a podcast is basically, can this person do this thing while driving in their car? If they can, without having to pull over on the side of the road and take a note and do math or do a body scan or click a thing or do track their BMI or track their food intake. Can this person do this? What are the concepts? What are the ideas that you can teach that guide somebody so that by the time they come into your world and into your arena, they're already a qualified buyer? And we're going to dive way deeper into this in future episodes, but mainly making sure that you are getting them to dismantle the belief systems along the way, that by the time they get on the call with you, those are belief systems and objections you shouldn't even have to address. So for example, if you are a functional medicine doctor and people are still coming to you looking for a Band-Aid, looking for a pill, looking for a solution that is just a quick fix, give me a pill, let me take it, let me feel better. And they're coming to you by that point that they're sitting in your office or on a discovery call with you, then you have not done a good enough job in your marketing to dismantle the belief systems so that they know that that's not what they're going to get by coming to you. What they're going to get by coming to you is an integrative functional medicine approach that will take some time, but will actually work on and heal the root cause instead of just giving a Band-Aid for a gangrenous wound. So the job of your marketing then is to be able to go on podcasts or have your own podcast or share in your social media, or, which we like to say, just leverage the podcast episodes that you do and cut those down into social media clips, and then you're good to go. That's what we do as an agency for our clients. Leverage those and share those so that you're shifting people's belief systems so that by the time they come to you, they know what they're getting. They're not wanting something different than what it is that you provide. They want what you provide. Then we have step number 7, which I know is the harder one for most people, which is sell. And we go into influence strategies, persuasion strategies, sales strategies. We are going to dive into how to communicate your sale, how to make it really super easy so that you can just sell effortlessly without feeling like a total sleazeball and like constantly name dropping your program. So instead, by the time you get to that end of the podcast where you get to plug yourself, it is just like that obvious next step. And that's what I want you to think about when you go on podcast interviews. What is that just absolutely obvious next step? And how can you make your interview so compelling, so enticing, so enchanting that obvious next step is so obvious people just obviously take it? And then the last one that we have is starting your own podcast. And this one is one that I get asked a lot because we have relationships with a ton of podcasters because we're constantly getting our clients booked on their podcasts. But starting your own podcast is a phenomenal way to build and nurture your audience and also nurture the people coming from podcast guesting appearances into your world who aren't yet ready to buy, who may need a little bit more of those belief system shifts, a little bit more of those identity shifts, a little bit more of some reframes, some guidance, some, dipping their toe in the water. They're still testing the area of having your own podcast. And I've had my own podcast, the Crown Yourself podcast, for 4 years now. We started in 2019, and it has been one of my greatest client retention strategies. It has been one of my greatest prospective, not ready to buy, like when you get a lead on a call and you know that you're like, they're 60% there. They're like not a hot one. They need a little bit more time, a little bit more challenge. They're not quite yet in that hot space ready to buy. That's when I direct them to the podcast. I direct them to certain episodes of the podcast. I direct them to, listen certain episodes that I think could serve them, could guide them to that next step. And then as they start to listen more and more, then they are more inclined to come into my world as a paying customer. And I've seen that consistently across the board for all podcasters, is that podcasting creates a beautiful ecosystem for people who may be tiptoeing around your world and they're not yet ready to purchase. They're not yet ready to fully invest, but they are investing their attention, which is huge. It's huge. And that's why I so deeply honor you listening to this, because when you start to get people to pay attention, eventually they pay. It's your job to hold that attention, to guide them with compelling stories, to serve with your whole heart, to stand out amongst all the other podcast guests, to provide different perspectives, to show up fully and be authentically you, and to truly show up and set yourself up for epic success. And that is what I am so excited to support you with getting to in that point, so that you feel so confident on any podcast interview that you ever go on, or any interview or any PR experience, or you get, like for me, I just literally was told 12 hours before a convention that I was going to MC the whole thing. I went from having a 15-minute segment to a whole 8-hour convention and emceeing the whole thing. I would not be able to step on that stage and do that as confidently as I did it had I not had 250, 300 podcasts under my belt, to where I am very comfortable with my oratory skill set and with what messages land and resonate. And I don't say that from a braggadocious standpoint. I say that from a practice standpoint. Like when you get in your reps, and podcast allows you to get in your reps with speaking. It allows you to get in your reps with practicing your message, seeing what lands, seeing what your community really resonates with, seeing what is, and hearing and getting that feedback. And it creates a dynamic relationship because it's more than just a screenshot of a quote that people scroll past 2 seconds later. It is an intimate relationship that most people who listen to podcasts tune in for 20 minutes. And so I'm so glad that you're here sticking with me through this. Like, I am so honored to have you here. Thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you crown yourself a communication queen so that your message can deeply resonate, impact, and generate an income for you and for your family. Because your story has the power to save one life, at least. You just have to have the courage to show up, stand out, share your story, serve, and sell. I'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you so much for listening. If you love this episode, subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with your friends. For more tips on guest podcasting, storytelling, and communication strategies, follow us on social media at Communication Queens Agency and visit us at communicationqueens.com. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. And in the meantime, remember, your story has the power to save one life. Let your story and your voice be heard.